Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, have no worries. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review. As Israel is preparing to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, 75 years have passed, but Holocaust survivors are still recounting the horrors as if they happened just yesterday.
И подает маме. Мама сидит на телеге с ребятишками, нас было 4 младших. И подает маме. Говорит, Агаша, береги младшенькую. Все, больше я папу не видела никогда.
והגרוע מכולם זה כאשר הגיעו שמועות אלינו ששאלנו למה לא רואים אף אחד מבני המשפחה שלנו. אמרו לנו, אתם לא רואים את העשן שעולה למעלה? לא יכולנו לחשוב אף לרגע למשרפות. ואז אני אמרתי, בשביל מה בעצם לחיות אם אפילו המלחמה תסתיים?
These nightmarish stories and hundreds more like them haunt the lucky few who survived the Nazi extermination program, even today, 75 years later. And each story is often more ghastly than the last, as victims were dehumanized, beaten, shot, burned alive, and even experimented upon.
בסוף הצריף היה שם כלוב. כלוב כמו של חיות. תתפשטו, תשבו שם. ובמשך כשבועיים בא מנגלה עם הצוות שלו זריקות בגב. והזריקות האלה עשו לנו תופעות נוראיות. הקאות וחום גבוה.
And the horrors don't follow the victims alone. Even the soldiers who liberated these camps have been scarred by their experiences.
Все время чувствовал такой гари, такой неприятной едкой гари. Немцы, охрана до нашего тоже еще прихода за неделю взорвала крематории. А видимо еще были трупы, неубранные трупы, незахороненные трупы.
When listening to these accounts, however, it may be easy to forget that the true story of the Holocaust is one of resilience, and that is the real meaning behind never again.
בוודאי שאני כועסת. אני מרגישה רע מאוד בגלל זה. אבל אני רואה את הילדים שלי ואת הנכדים שלי ואת הנינים שלי, וזו הנחמה שלי.
אני אומרת, אלוהים רצה שאני אשאר בחיים, ואלוהים רוצה שאני אספר.
Why is the World Holocaust Forum taking place in Israel this year, and why does this commemoration matter so much? Well, joining us with the answers is Professor Gideon Greif, a senior lecturer at the Jewish Studies Department of Israel's Ono Academic College. All right, so our first question might seem basic to you, but is important. It's been 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. What exactly happened on that day?
I would like to emphasize that Auschwitz was never liberated. When the Russians entered on January 26th or 27th of the year 1945, Auschwitz was empty because the Germans took all the thousands of prisoners into what is called the death marches. So
right.
It was an empty place, so they didn't liberate it.
Okay.
Only 6,000 to 7,000 sick prisoners were left there. Miraculously, they were not touched. They survived, most of them survived the Holocaust. So the Russians didn't liberate Auschwitz. Auschwitz was evacuated.
Well, that's an interesting thing that you're saying, especially given all of the kind of
We have
controversy
to be very
we're
accurate
seeing.
because history is a science. It's like biology, mathematics. You have to be very accurate.
So
actually,
Using
we even
the
have
right
reports.
terms.
right, so before we get to kind of Russia's role this year in the event, why is this commemoration taking place in Israel this year and not in Poland as it typically does?
I think if you would ask the murdered Jews or the humiliated Jews, the tortured Jews, they would say, it doesn't matter. We want to be remembered
Right.
everywhere. It can be here, it can be there. Of course, the most natural place is Auschwitz because the crime was perpetrated there. But I see nothing wrong in commemorating at Yad Vashem, which is the national remembrance authority. It's the right place.
Right, but this is clearly becoming a political issue in today's political atmosphere rather than kind of a commemoration of what took place. Poland is very upset that the Russian president is going to, or has spoken already today during the event. And Russia seems to see themselves as the heroes of World War II. They liberated the Jews and the prisoners. How does this narrative differ?
The last to complain should be the Poles. You know why? Because of their behavior during the Holocaust. Of course, there were thousands of righteous among the nations who endangered themselves to save Jews. Yes, that's right, we know all of it. But if you read testimonies, and we know everything, the Poles did not behave nicely to the Jews. 200,000 Jews were murdered, not by the Germans, by Poles, who lived with them for 1,000 years. Their property was looted by the Poles. The Poles denounced, collaborated, not all of them, of course. I don't want to generalize, but the Poles should really not complain.
Well, why do they care about that now in 2019?
Because the new government, the current government of Poland, tries to rewrite history, and you cannot write history. Facts are facts. You can argue about the interpretation of the facts, but the facts are facts, and they try to change the facts.
Why is Poland so upset about Russia, about Putin speaking particularly?
You know, in this story, let me tell you in principle, in this story there are only one bad guy, and this is the German. He is the bad guy. The Germans initiated the Holocaust, perpetrated it. All the others were part of this crime, but the Germans are the bad guys.
Yeah, and we're not talking about the Germans at all here.
They should be condemned, and they should be primarily condemned. They did the crime. They did this horrible crime to us and to the world. I don't know if you know that altogether, the number of innocent victims all over the world is not less than 55 million innocent people. Can you imagine? On September 1st, 1939, the country who attacked Poland was not the Soviet Union, was Nazi Germany. It was Hitler's personal decision. So the German army, the Wehrmacht, attacks Poland on September 1st, 1939. It's Germany, not the Soviet Union. Sometimes we forget this very simple fact.
But there seems to be a difference in narrative about how the war ended and who the saviors were, right? I mean,
and who liberated Berlin? Who liberated half of Germany? The Russian army, the brave Russian army. So the Polish narrative is not the real narrative. The Soviet narrative is more precise than the Polish one, no doubt. As I mentioned, history is a science. You cannot have two narratives about one event, only one.
All right, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, now meanwhile, as dozens of world leaders are gathering in Jerusalem, Russian President Vladimir Putin is reassuring Yafa Issachau, the mother of Naama Issachau, who's been sentenced to over 7 years in a harsh Russian prison.
Для меня ясно, что Наама из хорошей, очень порядочной семьи. Мне известна позиция господина премьер-министра, который просит принять соответствующее решение. Все это, безусловно, будет учтено при принятии этого окончательного решения. Сегодня Наама посещает уполномоченный по правам человека в России. Мама очень переживает, я вижу это. Ей сказал, и хочу еще раз повторить, все будет хорошо.
These comments come following a landmark meeting in Jerusalem between President Putin, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Yafa Issachau. And all the parties present seem to have left the meeting smiling. But with this somewhat cryptic language in mind, the question still remains. Will Naama be released or not? And if so, when? Well, authorities on both sides are suggesting that she'll be freed very soon. And the mother, Yafa Issachar, is also reporting a very pleasant encounter with President Putin, though she's keeping the details of their conversation close to the vest. Naama has been in Russian jail since April 2019, when she was arrested at a Moscow airport for having a handful of cannabis in her checked luggage, charges she later denied.
Well, the world is waiting on the White House's Middle East peace plan. In fact, we've been waiting through multiple delays and 2 Israeli elections. But now, according to new reports, the wait may soon be over. Will he? Won't he? Is it a good time or even a good idea? Well, the minds are racing with anticipation again as U.S. President Trump is expected to decide whether to publish his deal of the century before Israeli elections or not. And the decision is expected within the coming days following his week full of meetings with his peace team in Washington and with regional Arab leaders at the Davos World Economic Forum. Now, this plan includes a second half of the U.S.'s Middle East Peace Initiative detailing proposed political dimensions and solutions for the conflict. The first half, which deals exclusively with financial incentives for the Palestinians to negotiate with Israel, was presented in Bahrain last summer at the Peace to Prosperity Summit. In any case, what is holding Trump's decision back now?
Well, according to senior officials speaking to Israel's Channel 13 News, there are several factors, including the effect it may have on Israeli elections on March 2nd, as well as the upcoming impeachment proceedings against him. Meanwhile, in Israel, the decision is also split as Prime Minister Netanyahu wants the deal published as soon as possible, while Blue and White chairman and rival Benny Gantz wants it delayed. Still, White House advisor Jared Kushner will be arriving in Jerusalem for meetings with both Netanyahu and Gantz later this week, after which he'll discuss the details with President Trump, who will take them into his considerations.
Extremists on the right, extremists on the left, it's all the same in the eyes of Israel. And now, for the first time ever, Israel has banned a left-wing group from entry into Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank.
In light of new information, Defense Minister Naftali Bennett has ordered all security forces to bar members of Anarchists Against the Wall from entering Judea and Samaria. Now, the group is described as an anti-Zionist organization founded in 2003, intent on protesting the Israeli security barrier. But evidence collected by security forces, and even from disabled IDF veterans, allegedly shows that they're more intent on initiating violent, weekly provocations against IDF soldiers in multiple Palestinian villages. Bennett's office also explains that the circus is over, as some 30 activists are now banned from activities in the West Bank, including from other groups. But Anarchists Against the Wall was the only one named in particular. And chief among the banned members is Jonathan Pollock, the group's founder and a graphic designer at the Haaretz Daily, who is currently in jail for skipping criminal court proceedings.
How safe is Israel? That's a big question, but now a new report from Israel's internal security agency, the Shin Bet, is revealing some very shocking new information.
Israelis escape terror at least one time every day. That's what the numbers tell us, according to the Shin Bet, Israel's internal security service. They say last year the service thwarted more than 560 terror attacks in total, including 10 suicide bombings, 4 kidnappings, and 300 shootings. This number is also just a bit higher than it was in 2018, when the organization shut down 500 attacks total. During an annual ceremony, Shin Bet's chief, Nadav Algaman, announced that the big goal, however, is to overcome the threat of Iran, which has time and time again threatened to wipe Israel off the map. To that end, the Shin Bet says over the summer they busted up an attempt from Hamas and Hezbollah to recruit Arab Israelis as spies for Iranian intelligence. But a majority of those captured in schemes are considered to be lone wolves. Meanwhile, more suspicious balloons were discovered near the major central Israeli city of Beit Shemesh, and it turns out the balloons were filled with explosives while donning a little Palestinian flag. This method of terror started up in 2018 during a series of Palestinian riots at the Gaza border, but have not been as prominent in the last 6 months. So Israeli police are asking the public to again raise a red flag if they notice any suspicious-looking objects, even if they're reporting what appear to be innocent little balloons.
Now, less than a week has passed since the UK officially blacklisted Iranian-backed terror group Hezbollah. But with the United States and Israel quickly calling on others to follow suit, 3 South American countries have now already answered the call.
United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is now praising the leaders of Colombia, Honduras, and Guatemala for officially designating Hezbollah a terrorist organization. The addition of the Lebanon-based group to terrorist blacklists will make it more difficult for the Iranian proxy to operate internationally. And the announcements come during an international conference on regional cooperation against terrorism in Bogota, Colombia. Also, Argentina and Paraguay blacklisted Hezbollah last year, meaning that the organization is already listed as a terror group by most Western countries like the US, the UK, and Canada, in addition to the Arab League. The European Union, however, still differentiates between the political and military branches of Hezbollah, allowing the political wing to operate while banning the military. And meanwhile, one country at the Bogota conference did not denounce the group, drawing condemnation from United States officials.
We all know, too, that the Iranian regime's top terrorist proxy, Hezbollah, has found a home in Venezuela under Maduro, and that this is unacceptable. Since last we met, the United States has done our part to take down the threat of Iran's proxies. We eliminated Qasem Soleimani, and we've strengthened our maximum pressure campaign of economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and strategic deterrence.
Now, speaking of the coming March elections, we hope you're paying close attention because the details around the Knesset are changing daily, and now so are the campaigns.
Israelis are sick of the ongoing political stalemate. They're sick of the crippled government, the frozen initiatives, and the billions of shekels being lost to an endless election cycle with no end in sight. But in an attempt at turning lemons into lemonade, the Blue and White Party is now using citizens' unrest in its campaign strategy. The party's new slogan reads, "We have to move forward," and it's meant to capitalize on the feelings that people don't want a revolution, but they do want change and they want the country to work with stability. As for the Likud, Prime Minister Netanyahu's party is expected to unveil its own new slogan in the coming days. But meanwhile, the question remains, will Netanyahu be included in the vote at all? The Prime Minister and his aides are now angry at Likud MK and Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein for allowing a Knesset panel on immunity to form. And the committee will now decide whether to grant Netanyahu immunity from criminal prosecution while in office or not. But it's highly expected to refuse the Prime Minister's request.
In other news, an Arab-Israeli Knesset member is now under the spotlight for her consistent support for terrorism, and several party officials from across the spectrum are now calling for her dismissal from the coming March elections. Knesset member Hiba Yazbak from the Balad party and the Joint Arab List is not a household name, but all eyes are now on her and her alleged history of systematic support for terrorists and crimes against the state. Yazbak has posted messages in support of terrorist murderers like Samir Kuntar and spies like Amir Mechol. And just a few days ago, she even posted a photo of herself with Islamic movement head Raed Salah, who is currently in prison for incitement to terror and association with radical Islamic movements. So now Likud Knesset member Ophir Katz is petitioning the Elections Committee to bar Yazbak from Knesset out of a sense of moral duty. And both the Israel Beiteinu and Blue and White parties have announced support for her disqualification too. Similarly, Larissa Trimbobler, the wife of Yigal Amir who murdered Yitzhak Rabin, is also on the ban list. Now, meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu is also facing an uncertain future in the Knesset. A majority of Knesset officials are pressuring Speaker Yuli Edelstein to form the committee to decide on the Prime Minister's immunity. But as a Likud Knesset member himself, Edelstein is also being pressured not to listen, and specifically by Justice Minister and Likud Knesset member Amir Ohana. As long as Netanyahu's immunity is not brought to a vote, Attorney General Mandelblit cannot begin trial proceedings.
All right, moving on. It turns out that not all of Israel's natural energy partners are happy with the new deal, as Jordanian lawmakers are now working to ban Amman's natural gas agreement with Israel. ILTV's Nittany Manson reports.
Israel and her neighbors are off to a very strong start in 2020, with the beginning of gas exports to Jordan and Egypt from Israel's offshore Leviathan field. And the $10 billion agreement, which lasts 15 years, has already become essential to energy stability for tens of millions of Egyptians and especially Jordanians. Jordan imports nearly 98% of its energy needs, but in spite of this fact and a long-standing peace agreement, the announcement of the deal has sparked massive civilian protests in Amman. Many Jordanians still consider Israel an enemy state. And so in light of the people's unrests, the Jordanian parliament has now voted unanimously in favor of a law that would ban gas imports from the Jewish state. Still, the draft faces several obstacles ahead of passing into force, among them Jordan's new energy saving and security. Also, the government has acknowledged that the deal is technically between companies and not a political matter in the first place.
All right, now a world-famous Austrian cyclist has just turned Israel into his own personal playground. Check this out.
That's Fabio Widmer that you're looking at, a 22-year-old mountain biker from Austria who's known as a street trials rider. Street trials biking is a non-competitive freestyle form of riding that calls for precise control of the bike through jumps and balancing on very narrow obstacles. It seems super scary to me, but Fabio makes it look easy as he travels around Israel showing off his skills. And with the help of the Israeli tourism ministry, he's literally wowing us in every single part of the country, from the Negev desert to the Dead Sea. It's absolutely beautiful.
right, now they say that if you see water in the desert, you're probably hallucinating, but a secret river has just been discovered in the middle of the Israeli Negev, and locals are so excited about it that they're calling it the Israeli Grand Canyon. ILTV's Shanna Fold explains why.
It's a riverbed that could suck you in and never return you. And hiding in plain sight, the river is getting attention on social media for having never been seen before. Nestled in Israel's Arava Desert, the waterway has been coined the Secret River. And environmentalists say you have to view it from a helicopter or in pictures like these, because the arid land around it is full of mines and sinkholes that can, and do, open up at a moment's notice. The Dead Sea is the source of the water that flows into the river, and though Israeli TV outlets are saying it's gone completely unnoticed, local photography agency Bardugo says they've been selling photos of this for years. And professors at Hebrew University have been tracking its changes with photographic evidence and notes. You can see here how the ridge on the bank of the Dead Sea was closed in 1985 and protruded out by the early 2000s. In 2013, water had already broken through the salt delta, beginning to run through the ridges. Dr. Elad Dante, a PhD at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, published findings showing the waters becoming more entrenched in the landscape as materials are removed from the river's lining. The river lies between Israeli and Jordanian Dead Sea factories, which are thought to be responsible for the river's creation. Factories extract potassium from the saltwater, and the runoff has formed this tributary, making it even saltier than that of the Dead Sea. But don't get any ideas in your head about visiting, because geological experts say it's just too dangerous.
That's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. See you next week.